Kneel before Zod. And with those three chilling words, General Zod cemented himself as one of the greatest and most iconic Superman villains of all time. Hello, everyone. This is Warhawk Beyond 2040, and today I am going to be discussing my thoughts with all of you on why Smallville gave us the greatest live action portrayal ever of General Zod. Now, when you think of General Zod, obviously the first image that comes to mind is, of course, Terence Stamp. Terence Stamp played General Zod in Superman 1 and 2 and helped cement the character as one of the main heavy hitters in Superman's Rogues Gallery. But interestingly enough, General Zod has not been featured that much in animation, which is quite surprising, really, because General Zod to me is definitely up there with Lex Luthor and Brainiac in terms of important villains. So it is a real mystery to me why we haven't really seen General Zod that much in animation. But on the other hand, General Zod has been featured quite a lot in live action media, from the first two Superman movies to Smallville, to Lois and Clark, The New Adventures of Superman. Although he wasn't actually dubbed General Zod, he did display lots of General Zod's traits and characteristics. He also was featured in a big role in Krypton, and he made a few cameos in the Arrowverse in Supergirl, albeit hallucination. And of course, he was featured as the main villain in the DCEU movie Man of Steel and would return in the final DCEU movie, The Flash. So General Zod's been around quite a bit in terms of being showcased in live action. And, when I think of iconic live action portrayals, I think of three guys: Terence Stamp, Michael Shannon, and Callum Blue. Now, these three guys have all brought something different to the General Zod character. Terence Stamp brought a lot of the typical classic bad guy 101, and he was very aristocratic and very quiet and very laid back. Michael Shannon, he brought a lot of intensity to the General Zod character. His intensity was off the charts, and he was portrayed as more of a military figure with one mission: protect my people no matter what. And he was all about continuing the Kryptonian bloodline and wanting to desperately create a new Krypton for his people. Callum Blue, he brought more of a classy, elegant feel to the Zod character with a level of intensity and sophistication, but he still had all of those militarial traits that we all know Zod for. And just like the Michael Shannon Zod, he was a man on a mission: protect my people no matter what. And this is where my point comes into play about why I feel Callum Blue was, without a doubt, the best live action portrayal of General Zod ever. So, General Zod was first hinted at in Smallville season 5, and we didn't really see him in the flesh. We saw him as this disembodied spirit that was trapped in the Phantom Zone after he was stripped of his body, and Brainiac was trying to release Zod so he could have a vessel to inhabit and attempt to recreate Krypton on Earth, hence a new Krypton. But we didn't really know much about General Zod's backstory. The most we learned was he corrupted Brainiac, who is this artificial intelligence slash internet on Krypton, and we learned that General Zod, in the final days leading up to Krypton's destruction, had a big hand in it. He played a big role in Krypton blowing up. So, unlike General Zod, in the Superman movies, who was all about control, this Zod was still all about that, but he was much more military based. But again, we didn't really see Zod in the flesh. We would see Zod's spirit take over Lex Luthor after Brainiac injected him with a serum that would give him superpowers. So, what we saw at the end of the final episode of season 5 and the first episode of season 6 was we saw Lex Luthor taken over by Zod, and it was cool to see Michael Rosenbaum acting like Zod, displaying all of the classic traits and hallmarks that we all know Zod for. And, Michael Rosenbaum did an excellent job. But as I said already, we didn't really see General Zod in the flesh. Then, fast forward to season 8, Zod would be referenced once again. We would see Davis Bloom, who was a human camouflage for Doomsday, and it was revealed that he was made out of genetic matter by General Zod and Faora, thus making him his birth parents. And we even heard Faora, who took over the body of Lois Lane, that Davis Bloom looked exactly like Zod when he was younger. And the idea of General Zod and Faora as parents didn't really appeal to me that much, but I could believe that Zod may have had a child at some point. But the idea of this big villain having children, yeah, it wasn't really that appealing to me. But once again, we would get lots of hints about Zod. He was constantly referenced throughout season 8. And then at the end of season 8, in the season finale, Tess would go outside and see the purple orb glow, and we would see the Zod symbol burned in the lawn, and we'd see a person standing there, and we'd hear this voice screaming out, Zod. So we were finally going to get to see Zod in the flesh, and he was announced that he was going to be the main villain for season 9. Now, when it was announced that we would see Zod in the flesh for season 9 as the main villain, I was very intrigued. I was very interested to see how they were going to handle Zod on the show. And when it was also announced that the Zod that we were going to see wasn't going to be the classic General Zod villain from the Superman movies, this was going to be a young Zod. This wasn't going to be the general that we all know. He was going to be a young major, and he wouldn't have the iconic beard. He was essentially a younger version of Zod. And I was really interested and very intrigued to see how they were going to pull this off. And this was essentially Zod's origin, because we never really got to learn about his backstory that much. So Smallville were going to give us exactly that, and full origin story for Zod. And another twist to this young Zod was he was going to be a clone of the original General Zod. So he would have no memories of what he did in the final days leading up to Krypton's destruction. He wouldn't know that he would become the evil general that we all know. He was a confused young major on Earth with no powers, with his army. I thought they did an amazing job with his story. We also got to learn why Zod turned to the dark side. We were treated to an amazing first half of an episode called Candor. So it was interesting to see that Jor-El and Zod were best of friends. And we would see Zod's family get destroyed by Black Zero. Candor is pretty much wiped out. And we would see Zod as a broken man, because all the time we've seen this very cold military figure. He doesn't really care for anything or anyone. So we learned that he had a family, and there was already a bit of a tragic backstory to him. And what we got to see in the flashback was, in a very rare moment, Zod goes to Jor-El and begs him, and that's a very rare moment. Zod begging, and this is a guy who never begs for anything or to anyone. He goes up to Jor-El and says to him, "Bring me back my son, please." And Jor-El, of course, says, "I can't do that, Zod. We don't know the consequences of what the cloning technology could do. We still don't know how this works." And we see Zod just breaking down and saying, "Please, he's all I've got left in the world. He's my son, Jor-El. You can bring him back to me." And Jor-El is basically saying, "We're not gods, Zod. We cannot raise people back from the dead." And Zod continued to beg and said, "What would you do if you had a son?" And Jor-El pretty much coldly says, "I'm sorry, Zod. There's nothing more I can do." And in that moment, this was one of the best moments from Callum Blue. We would slowly see Zod revert to the dark side and basically transform, not completely, but to slowly transform into that Zod we know. Says to him, "After everything I've done for you, how dare you deny me this request?" And in that moment, he cemented himself as the big bad by saying, "You are as dead to me as my son." Unbelievable stuff. And the thing about young Zod, he still had that arrogance. He still had that cocky nature because he's a young guy. He's not going to be the Terrence Stamp Zod that we know yet. So we didn't really get to see him wearing the black jumpsuit from Superman 1 and 2, which I'm glad we didn't because I don't think that would have worked in Smallville. Young Zod, we see him wearing suits and ties, leather trench coats. Obviously, in the first episode, we see him in his combat gear, which I thought was pretty cool. This young Zod, he's more or less trying to find his way. Who am I going to be? Where do I fit? And of course, eventually, he gets his powers thanks to Clark saving his life thanks to a drop of blood from him. And I'll never forget that moment. Zod jumps off the roof, flies for the first time, and we see that evil smirk. And that said to me, "Oh yeah, he's back. General Zod is officially back and more evil than ever." And I thought it was interesting that Zod really wanted Clark in his army, and Clark thought that maybe if I tried to befriend Zod, maybe he wouldn't become the monster that we would all know. Yeah, that didn't work out too well. But I thought Callum Blue was excellent, and he really helped fill that void that Michael Rosenbaum's Lex Luthor left behind. Because Michael Rosenbaum, obviously, we all know he's the best Lex Luthor ever. He had 7 seasons to develop his character and eventually transform into the evil Lex Luthor that we all know. With Callum Blue, on the other hand, his Zod, he had 1 season, but I thought they did a really good job. I mean, obviously, they've teased Zod back in season 5 and a bit of 6 as well. Obviously, we didn't get to see him in the flesh, and obviously, in season 8, they referenced him again. So, we know that Zod's presence was already there, but we just didn't get to see the man himself. And Callum Blue filled those shoes very nicely. And I would say Callum Blue's Zod was definitely up there with Michael Rosenbaum's Lex Luthor. He was definitely the man of the show, of that second half, because, as I said, the show wasn't really the same after Michael Rosenbaum's Lex Luthor left. And Callum Blue's Zod really helped fill that void and take the show in a much more different direction. And for me, out of all 10 seasons of Smallville, season 9 is my all time favourite, and a lot of that was because of Callum Blue's Zod. He was just unbelievable. He owned every scene he was in, and it's interesting that he did say Neil before Zod, but we heard him say that in the first episode of season 9 and didn't have much weight to it. Once he got his powers and we heard him say it officially, then it mattered. It mattered a lot more. And he was phenomenal. He was absolutely phenomenal. And I can imagine Zod as a young guy behaving like this because, every good villain has a beginning. They didn't start out like that unless you're the Joker. But every villain has a beginning, and to see Zod go from being the young major to the evil general was excellent. I thought Smallville did a great job telling the origin story, tying it in with Jarrell and Clark as well. I thought it was tremendous stuff. And we would see Zod return in season 10 for one episode, sadly. I do think they should have brought him back for a few more episodes. We see Clark is in the Phantom Zone. He meets Zod again. This time he's got the full beard, he's got the long robe, and he's a lot different. And we finally got that scene where Zod says to him, after the Kandorians send me to this hell, I met a very special acquaintance of yours, someone you know very well, and someone I admire very much. And Clark asked, who's that then? And in that deep, menacing Zod voice, me. I thought it was a stroke of genius, merging the original Zod's Phantom with the clone of his younger self to create one complete being. Tremendous writing, stroke of genius. I do think that should have happened in season 9. I thought what was going to happen was Tess would try to send Zod to the Phantom Zone. She accidentally releases the original Phantom. The Phantom takes over Zod's body, and we see him become the full General Zod. Beard, deep voice, and that military, aristocratic nature that we all know and love to hate. That's what I thought was going to happen, but it didn't. But I'm glad they finally gave us that in season 10, and Callum Blue once again knocked it out of the park, and he really felt like the Zod we all know and love, or love to hate, if you will. And I always looked at his young Zod as an extension of the Terrence Stamp Zod. If they had addressed that in the Superman movies, I could believe that Terrence Stamp's Zod was like this because they were very similar to one another, and Callum Blue was amazing. That's why I feel out of all of the Zods we've had on screen, none of them really had much of a backstory except Callum Blue's, which for me makes him the best live action portrayal of General Zod ever. I just thought he did an amazing job. I would have loved to have seen him in more episodes for season 10, but the episode we did get, it was excellent. I loved it. I thought he did a great job. All due respect to Michael Shannon and Terrence Stamp, they're great, but my God, Callum Blue was excellent. He was the man. I loved it. So that's going to be it from me. I am going to wrap this up now. What was your thoughts on Callum Blue's performance as General Zod on Smallville? Do you think he did a great job? Would you put his Zod up there with Michael Rosenbaum's Lex Luthor? Do you think he was a good villain? And also, what about his backstory? Do you think Smallville did a great job telling his origin on the show? And also, what was your favourite Zod episode? And what Zod moments stand out to you? You know what to do, guys. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, leave your thoughts and comments down below, and I will see all of you next time. So until then, take care, everybody, and stay safe. And once again, as always, much appreciated. Thanks for listening, and remember, kneel before Zod.